In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at this contact lens case, and we're going to make it so we can pose it. Let's say that we want to have a situation where one of the caps is flipped open so that you can do renderings of it being in both a closed and an open state. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial by using an armature and the bones and IK system. Since we only want to have the left cap open, and to make this easier, we're going to go ahead and separate this. So I'm going to go into X-ray mode. In face mode, we're just going to take and separate this half. So P key, and we're going to separate that by selection. And let's just go ahead and turn that off for right now. And then on this side, because we have all of this overlapping geometry, it's really going to be a pain to try and get this isolated and assigned to the correct bones. So the first thing we're going to do is then come over onto this side. So let's come over into the left view, and we need to separate this. Let's go ahead and turn off subdivision, and we need to separate this. So we're going to kind of focus on this area because this is going to be where we assign the bones and the deformation is going to happen. So let's go ahead and double click there and there, and then go ahead and select everything else. So we just have all of this connecting geometry that's going to deform. P key, and we're going to separate that to become its own object. Tab key leaves edit mode, and then we'll come back over to this, and I'm just going to rename it contact case. So it's going to essentially become the parent object. Let's come back to the main mesh, and let's come into edit mode for that, and let's separate the main cap component geometry, which is really easy now because it's separated. So press Command or Control L to do a select connected, and then P key to separate that to become its own object. Tab key leaves edit mode, and then let's just select that. And I want to make sure it's named so it's really clear when we're looking at our components. And the bottom down here, let's call this just bottom, so it's really clear what these components are. Let's come back up to the top, and in edit mode for it, let's select all of its vertices, and we'll come down here to data object properties, and under vertex group, we're going to give this one vertex group, and we will call this cap, and then we'll make sure that all of the vertices are assigned to cap, and this will make sense as we progress through, but the naming of these vertex groups becomes very important. So let's go ahead and leave edit mode and come back to this contact case, the main deforming mesh. Let's go ahead with the process of assigning an IK structure. I want to come down here to the mesh we're working on. Now I'm going to be flipping back and forth between X-ray mode and non-X-ray mode. I'm not going to announce every time I do it. Okay, so let's come over into Edge and double click around this open perimeter. Shift S, cursor to selected to bring focus to that area. Let's come back into the left view. With that there, we need to establish an armature. Shift A, and we will add an armature, and it's going to generate one gigantic bone, and let's just come and make it 1/8 of an inch, something that's visibly in the scene. And I'm sorry, I'm using inches. I know not everyone does that, but I'm an American and we use inches here. So let's come into edit mode. So we're going to be switching between edit mode and pose mode a lot. So let's come into edit mode, which will allow me to come in and just edit the bone and place it about like that. Now this is going to be my root bone. Press the E key, and I want to establish a bone for every rib on this curvature of the curvature mesh here. E key, so I'm just pressing the E key. I'm eyeballing it. It doesn't need to be 100% exact. We'll be able to do it visibly close enough, and we'll get that about right there. And then finally one here, and then finally E key for a final one. Let's go just along the y-axis. We'll put a big bone there, and that will be our final bone that controls the cap. So let's come in and take a look at each of the bones. If I select that bone right there, we're in edit mode, I can come down to the bone and we can see it's got a name. And so the next one is bone 001 and bone 002 and so on and so forth. So the name of the bone is actually important in terms of controlling the mesh, because the mesh gets assigned to a bone via a vertex weight that has the same name. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and assign this. We want to select the object first, the mesh, and then we want to select the armature that it gets assigned to. So hold the Shift key and then select the armature, which has the yellow color. So it's the active selected object. And then we come down to parent, and under armature deform, we want to do parent with empty groups. That's important for what we're going to be doing right here. We don't want it to try and figure out how to automatically weight them. It will produce messy results. So with empty groups is what we want. Now, when we come back over here to this mesh, which you can see now is a child of armature, let's come down to data object properties, and we can see that it now has vertex groups that match the bone names. So that's the important thing to consider. In the armature, the bones and their names will know to affect the mesh because the mesh has vertex groups and the names of these vertex groups match the bones. That's the connection between the two. Let's come back into edit mode for this mesh that we're deforming, but it's important to note that we're going to completely ignore weight painting for what we're doing. We could use it, but what I'm going to show you is a far more precise way of assigning these. Let's come into vertex mode, and we have the first bone here. And if I come over and double click, I can see this loop select. So there's that. If you're not using a laptop like I am and the emulate 3-button mouse, you'll have to hold the Option Alt key and click on a loop to select it. For me, it's double clicking. For you, Option Alt click does a loop select. So we're going to come in and figure out how to assign a weight to this. I want to assign this to the correct bone, but we're really in this state of abstraction right now where I can't really quite tell what bone this is. So we need to change the display a little bit to facilitate this naming. Let's actually leave edit mode and let's select our bone structure here. Come down to data object properties for the armature itself, and down here under viewport display, let's put it in front, which is going to help. But primarily we want to see the names. So that's really going to be useful. And we're also going to be focusing on the end point of a bone. So when I talk about a bone and what we're going to be assigning to the bone in terms of vertex weights, we're really focusing on the end tip. Let's think about it that way. So let's come back to this mesh and let's come into edit mode for it. If I go out of X-ray mode, we can still see the bones because they're now being drawn in front. We've got the names, which is really useful. If I come to this loop here, and I want to assign this to the weight, I now know that it's going to belong to bone 1. So we come up to bone 1, and we would click assign, but we're not seeing anything. But we can do that in edit mode. So let's come over here, and then let's come down to where it says shading vertex groups. Well, this is awesome because now I can, in edit mode, see the vertex weighting, and we just have to click assign, and there we go. So this first bone, which is just called bone right here, will have maximum influence on the vertex loop that's at its tippy end right there. I would like it to control down here a little bit. So I've got this, and this is the one sort of oddball. I'm going to give this a value of 0.5 and we'll assign that. But what we're really interested in also is the fact that we have all of the geometry on the bottom, which is not joined in yet. And it's going to be blue. Blue means those vertices have no influence by the bone. The bone won't deform those. So then what we do is we come to bone 1 here, and I know it's frustrating because we're not seeing a bone highlight. I'm highlighting a vertex group, but we're not really visibly associating the bone become highlighted because we're not actually selecting a bone right now, okay? We're selecting the vertex group that's going to be assigned to it. That's why the names are really important here. So now I come here to the next loop and I double click that and I make sure my weight assignment is 1 and I assign that. Let's come to the next bone 2 and we're going to double click this and we're going to assign, and then let's just keep going up. So bone 03 will be assigned to these, assign, okay, and then bone 04 will be assigned to these, and so on. And so we just progress up. Bone 05, assign, bone 06, assign, and then we get to the top, bone 07, assign, and then the last one right here, we're going to rename this and we're going to call this cap. Okay, so this is important. Since we've made a change here, we also need to go over and change the name of the bone, and this is really important. Now, sometimes the bones don't want, the armature doesn't like to select at an object level, so we could come up here and just select the armature, and let's come into edit mode, and I can select this bone down here under the bones properties. We're going to name this cap also. Again, the name needs to match, so that's where we're being careful about that. So let's leave edit mode for the armature and come back to this mesh. So this bone right here that we're calling cap, it needs to begin influencing at this connection point. So here we're going to assign 1, and then all of the rest of the cap vertices that are going to be controlled by this will also get assigned to 1. Let's leave edit mode for this object, and we're going to merge this now. So remember, if the cap object already has this vertex group that we've called cap, which matches the one that's already on this mesh, so it's going to merge the two. So again, if we come in and we select, we look at this, because we have that overlay turned on, we can see that all of these vertices are assigned to cap. Okay, so let's take and merge these two together. I'm holding the shift key and selecting the contact case mesh, making sure that it's the active mesh, and then we join these together and they all get added to contact case over here. We want to weld these, so let's come into edit mode and let's do this. I'm going to just select here and let's temporarily just turn this off because it's kind of obtrusive when you're wanting to do other operations. So the seam point is right here in the middle. Let's switch over into vertex and do merge vertices by distance, and it'll select just those overlapped vertices. Okay, so now we can come back in and we'll turn on this vertex group overlay. And we can see that it's been merged. We have cap as the vertex group, which encompasses all of the vertices of the cap up to this first loop of the transition that goes down into our deforming area. So let's come down to the bottom. Let's leave edit mode. Let's go ahead and merge this mesh in, the base here. So let's hold the shift key. So the active is what we're going to merge into. So we're going to join those two together. And let's just come back into edit mode. Let's come over temporarily and just turn this off so that we can easily see. And I'm just going to marquee roughly around the area that I want to make sure that I'm doing those merge by distance, and it will get those merged in. I've overselected, but that's okay. If you're ever concerned about things accidentally being welded, just make sure you have a tolerance value that's pretty small. Since they were exactly overlapping, we'll be just fine. Okay, so let's come back in now and let's re-enable this vertex group weighting. Now, when we come down to the base bone, the base bone is still going to only be influencing the tip of the bone, these vertices that are in red, and by default, all of these vertices down here that are blue are going to have no effect. They're not assigned to any bone, which is what we want, because these are just going to always remain stationary. So let's come in now and let's go ahead and turn off this vertex overlay. I mean, you can test it so we can see those assignments as they progress up. Let's go ahead and leave edit mode. Let's come back to object. So if I come over to the armature now and we go into pose mode, now I can select this bone. I can press the R key. You can see that it is in fact now controlling the mesh, and we could play with this until we get it the way we like. But that's kind of clunky to have to manually go in and play with each bone. So we're going to look at using an IK system to give you a much more flexible and easy way of doing that. Let's come into edit mode for the bones, and I'm going to select the very end right here, do Shift S, cursor to selected. Let's leave edit mode. In my case collection here, we're going to add a target. Shift A and come down to empty and plane axis. It's going to be huge, so let's make it smaller. And we're going to call this target dot end. I'm going to actually duplicate this. Shift and D. Call this target closed position. This is just going to be for reference purposes. We need to tell the bone structure to kind of look at that. So we need to come back over and we'll select the armature, and let's come into pose mode, and we're going to assign an action, like a little program, to this end bone to tell it to target not only that target, but to affect in a reverse way the chain below it. Since we have caps selected, you're going to note a new properties called bone constraint becomes available down here. Let's add a bone constraint. Come down to inverse kinematics, and you'll see it turns into that orange color. And by default, it draws this line to the beginning of the first bone, and that's its influence range. So if I come over here and type in, let's say 3, the inverse kinematics will only affect down to this starting point of this bone. So as I increase this value, you can see that that will become the range of influence. Well, we can go all the way to 9, and that will be the end. If you use 0, that'll just automatically tell it to look for the end of the chain. So in our case, 0 or 9 is going to be the same. Let's go ahead and tell this bone constraint that's assigned to cap, the bone cap, what to target. So click this and then come up here to target end. And that's all we need to do. Now we just leave pose mode, come back to object mode, because it's at object mode that we're going to select this target. We can just move it, and there you go. So now we have this functional IK chain, and this is far easier to pose than trying to manually come in here and tweak each bone's position. We can animate that, for instance. Now, my goal in this case isn't to animate it, because you can clearly get to a position where you're overlapping like this. I simply wanted to do this for easy posing so I could have an open position, and I could play with my open positions, and I could pose it in a very easy way. And then I could plop it back to a closed position. So let's do Shift S, cursor to world origin. So we have our cursor back in a default position, and we created this target that I called closed position specifically so we can do Shift S, cursor to selected, and then we could use the target that's actually being used by the armature, and we just do cursor to selected, and we return it to the closed position. It's like a closed position marker. So that's all there is to this. And it's pretty cool for when you need to pose something like this. Now, all we have to do is just merge in the other side. So we take this, hold the Shift key, select there, and join the two together, Tab key, and then we just weld them along that symmetry point, merge vertices by distance, and that's it. I always lower this. I'm always leery of accidentally welding something. Still got 63. And let's turn off our vertex group. And there we go. So now we can see the effect of that, and I can come over pretty easily, grab this, and play with that until I get sort of a pose that I happen to really like.